Hey guys, it's Ben here from Find a Way Photography. I just wanted to quickly go through a new program that I've been using. It's by Macphun and it's called Luminar. It hasn't been out very long, but I've just kind of started digging into it and learning my way around it. And I thought I'd share a quick review and my thoughts on how I use it, and give you some ideas in case you wanted to look at possibly buying it for yourself. So I've got some photos over in Lightroom, so let's grab one of those. I'll show you how I move it into Luminar, and then we'll get started. So we'll jump over here to Lightroom. I've got one here. I've actually edited it already in Lightroom, and it came out something like this. So now we're gonna go and do the same thing in Luminar and see what we come up with. So I just take it from here. I drag it straight down onto my Luminar thing down in my dock, and it opens it up. And then you can see it just loads it straight into Luminar, which is pretty cool. So Luminar is kind of a standalone raw photo editing program. So it does pretty much everything that Lightroom does in the develop module. So let's hop back into Lightroom. So in the develop module, it's pretty much a mirror of what Lightroom does. You've got your sliders down along the right, and then the photo here and whatever else. What Luminar is missing is this library tab. So this is where I organize all of my photos and do all my stuff like that. And heading over into Luminar, you can see it's just basically just that develop module. So let's make this full screen, and then we'll start digging into it. And so the first thing, once I loaded up Luminar, the first thing that I noticed is that they have this, they call it a workspace. And it's basically, instead of something like Lightroom where you have all the sliders down the right and you can open and close tabs as you need to, here they just have different basically setups for that. So you can add different sliders and that sort of thing for different workspaces. So if I click here, right now I've got nothing, but you can see if I just want to do a quick photo edit or just the essential sliders, black and white. Maybe I'm working on a landscape photo. It just kind of picks the appropriate sliders for that type of photo. So you don't have everything. You just have basically what Luminar thinks you need to do these types of photos. And the other thing you can do is you can kind of come up with your own what you use all the time, and you just maybe you pick that one every time, and then you have those sliders easy to access and ready to go. In this case, we're going to go with landscape because it is a landscape photo. And you can see that loads up temperature, this AI filter, tone, that sort of thing. And so this is what my workspace looks like right now. If I wanted to add some more to this, so I've got quite a bit of stuff here to play around with. If I want to add some other stuff, all I do down here is add filter. And that shows everything else that I can add on top of what I've already got to play around with. So that's pretty cool, and it does work good. The other thing we've got down here are the presets, and so I've got a couple of them that came as extras when I bought Luminar, and then all of the other kind of base ones as well. And you can buy more, you can make some. Tons of different options with the presets, and then if you're not going to apply a preset, it's just this one down here. You just close that up, and that gets them to disappear. So that's a little bit about the workspace itself. And then along the top here, we have stuff where you can, export, import photos. This is where you can change the view of the image itself. So you can zoom in a little bit like this, and then move around with the hand if you want to take a better look at something. And then back here, once you've moved around, just clicking this one gets you back to the full screen. And then you can also zoom into 100%, so that basically makes it so that 1 pixel of the photo represents 1 pixel on the screen. And that's where a lot of people like to do their sharpening and that sort of thing. It gives you the most accurate results. So that's just a quick click of a button. This is your before and after stuff. So clicking this one turns the whole photo back to its before. So I haven't made any changes yet. So let's just bump up the exposure. So pretty obvious change. Clicking this one just takes us back to what the original one was. So click and hold takes you back. So it's just a quick way to easily switch back to see what kind of progress you've made. And then this one here gives you before and after and gives it in the form of a slider. So that's pretty cool. And then let's just reset that. And then we've got undo, so that lets you go back if you've done something. So like I had done before, if you didn't want to do that, you just click undo. And then history, which shows you all the changes that you've made. You've got a few different display options where you can hide the histogram or display it, and then hide your layers panel or display that as well. And then like we looked at before, we've got where you can display the presets or not, and then display that side panel and basically take up that whole space with the photo. And then again, down the right hand side, you've got tools, brushes, gradient filters, radial filters. This lets you transform the image if you want to rotate it side to side, or kind of extrude it bigger or smaller, that sort of thing. And then you've got the clone stamp, and then you've got the erase tool. This is your denoise filter, crop, and then installing different plugins. So you've got all the tools just kind of easy to access right down the side. Histogram again at the top, and then your layers. We'll get into layers in just a second. This is probably one of the biggest things that I'm excited about in Luminar. It totally changes everything that you can do. And then filters down here and the workspace and that sort of thing, like we were talking about before. So let's get into just doing a quick edit on this one using filters, and just showing you some of the different sliders, some of the different filters, and what's available here to work with. So color temperature is pretty simple. We're just going to leave that as is, but if you wanted to, you could play around with this and change the temperature of the photo. Boost, this one's quite cool. So this is AI, which I'm guessing stands for artificial intelligence, and it's basically just one slider, and it kind of takes its best guess at the photo. So you can see as I increase this, it's playing around with saturation, contrast, a few different things like that. And it's basically, if you start out with a photo and you want to spend 10 seconds or less on it, you crank this thing up, does a pretty good job, guesses kind of what's going on, and does what it needs to do. So it's kind of a good start to any photo. You just kind of drag that up a little bit, get things started. While we're here, before I go any further, I'm just going to crop quick. So you click this button, brings up the crop panel, and that's it. One thing that I did miss having is in Lightroom, you can draw a line across the horizon, and it automatically straightens the photo. I don't see any way to do this. If there is, correct me, but I don't see any way to do it, so I'm just kind of eyeballing it, and then you hit apply. And then that takes us back here. Tone is just, these are your basic adjustments, exposure, contrast, that sort of thing. So we'll bump up the exposure a bit. Contrast, I'm actually going to bring that down to open up the mountains in the back. And then let's see what that does. Cool. Bring down those highlights maybe. Lift up the shadows just a little bit. Whites are pretty good. I could actually probably bring that down a bit, and then I'm going to bring those blacks down just to bring that depth of the color back into the photo. And saturation, vibrance, we maybe add a bit of vibrance in this one. It is taking on this kind of a bluish color, but I do like that. It was kind of gives you that cold morning feeling, so I'm going to keep that as it is. Polarising Filter is a really cool slider to see, so different than anything else that's in Lightroom and that sort of thing. If you crank this thing up, you can see it has a huge effect on the sky and any lake or water or reflections, that sort of thing. Just like putting a polarizing filter on a camera, it's going to add contrast and a little bit more vibrance to those areas. And it'll also cut glare. So it actually works pretty good at imitating what a polarizing filter would do. So we'll just add a bit of that. Foliage enhancer is really cool as well. Unfortunately, I can't really show you anything here. This photo was taken at the Wanaka tree, which usually has foliage on it, but not in the winter after it's lost all of its leaves. So we'll have to leave that one. But basically, what it allows you to do is change the hue of that foliage, and it's really cool. It's very, very smart at picking out what parts of the photos are leaves, or sometimes I've even done it and it's got moss on branches, which maybe isn't really foliage, but it picks it out and lets you edit it completely independently. And again, you can You can see it's quite smart. It's not really changing anything because there's no foliage in the photo, so that's cool. And then you would obviously change the amount that it does it as well. So yeah, it's not doing anything because we have no foliage, which is nice to see that it actually is smart enough to know that. But if you do have foliage, then it lets you independently change it, which is quite cool. And clarity, which is no real difference from what we would see in something like Photoshop or Lightroom. Lightroom, I guess, not as much Photoshop, but clarity just bumps up those contrasts in the midtone. Structure is another one that's quite cool that isn't in Lightroom, and this one kind of gives all this grainy look to different parts of the photo, brings out contrasts, and it's almost like the clarity slider, but in a totally different way. So you can see what it's doing to the mountains back there, and I think it's a really cool effect. So in a little bit, I'll show you how we can use layers to just independently apply this to a certain area. So we'll do that in a little bit. In the meantime, I'll just zero that out again. Image Radiance. This is probably my favorite slider. I don't know what it's going to do in this photo, but so in this, I guess they call it filters, but in this filter panel, you can crank up the amount of radiance that it applies, and then some other small little details there. But what I find is it gives the photo this really cool glow, and it kind of makes it almost like a fairy tale effect. Just makes it kind of fantasy-like, and it's quite cool what it can do. In this one, not such a cool effect. It's doing a little bit, but in certain photos, it just it'll make a huge difference. And that's one thing that I've really found that I like about Luminar, is that it just it really lets you get creative with your photos. Lightroom is kind of the same cut and dry every time, and it works, and it's accurate, and it works the same way every time. But sometimes there's kind of these creative, mysterious sliders in Macphun that you never quite know what they're going to do, and they really do have a cool effect. And Image Radiance is one of them. On certain photos, it really does do some cool stuff. So not much to do here, but then you can kind of play around with how smooth it's making that kind of glow effect. Play around with the brightness in those parts, and then you can also kind of play around with how it's saturating those as well as the warmth. So lots to play around with, and lots to learn how they all kind of mesh together as well. So lots of experimenting and that sort of thing. And that's one thing that if you're just tired of what Lightroom and Photoshop and your typical photo editing process is doing, if you're just tired of it and you want to change, you want to give your photos a different look, I think Luminar is an awesome program to do that. Just because there are so many different things that you can do. This one is another one. Lets you independently change how bright or dark the bottom and the top are. Lets you do that independently of each other, and then you can change kind of where this is. So you can do the same thing with some graduated filters and that sort of thing. It's just nice to have it all in one place like that. And vignetting, nothing really different here. Just lets you put that dark band, or if you really want to go that way, you can put the light band as well. But it's cool just being able to drag that in, and then change a few other things. Not much different than what's in Lightroom. Cool. So that's the other thing in vignetting. You can actually place the center. So in Lightroom, the only way that you can really do it is around the center. But with Luminar, you can take the vignetting and move the center to maybe down here, and you can see how it's kind of drawing that vignette around here and putting more in the top and less down here. So it's quite cool actually how that works, and I like having that option. Let's head here, and I'll show you some other filters that we can add. So clicking that button takes you out of just our standard, what they're calling the landscape workspace, and you can add all of these different things. So we've already got this one added. You can also add things like an adjustable gradient, a little bit more into contrast, and giving you a few options there. It's kind of like a split toning. That's quite cool. But it's like it says here, it's simulating a bi-color filter, so you can have purples and greens kind of on the top or bottom and that sort of thing. And you know, if I wanted to add that, all it is a click of a button, and then it lets you choose your top color, lets you choose your bottom color, and then the colors, the different colors, and based on what a typical filter would look like. So that's quite cool. And then brightness and contrast, there's all these different things. You can add a cross-processing thing, so you can give your photo kind of a look like that. You can add the curves, so you can play around with that. So if you want to, you know, add some curves to your thing, something like that, you can play around with, you know, all sorts of different options. Dehaze is cool. Lightroom has that. If you have Lightroom CC, you have access to kind of a dehaze slider, so it's nice to see that here in Luminar. Details enhancer, which is kind of like sharpening in the, you know, in those micro details. Dramatic, again, and these are just the ones that are kind of these creative sliders that don't really, you know, they don't exist in Lightroom, and you're not really sure what they're going to do. And you can see it's kind of adding some contrast and getting rid of some saturation and that sort of thing. So they're quite fun to play around with, all these different things. What else do we have? Some exposure. You can add fog. That one's quite cool. You know, quite a few other ones that we've already played around with. You can get access to your HSL panel, so you can independently change the hue, saturation, and luminance of each of the colors, which gives you a ton of control. Image radiance, which we've already looked at. That's one of my favorites. All sorts of other ones. Let's see if there's anything else that's worth mentioning. Soft focus, that's quite cool. You can see the effect that gives it. So just kind of this dreamy effect. We've got soft glow, and you can do some split toning as well, which is a really nice one. You've got structure, texture overlay, and then some of the other ones that we've already played with. And then you can also filter how these presets are displayed, or sorry, these filters are displayed if you want to change that up. Cool. So that, you know, so we've kind of edited the photo so far. There's lots left that you could do to it. It's quite dark right now and that sort of thing. But it gives you an idea of what you can do. So somewhere here is my exposure, so we could crank that up a little bit and brighten that up. And then it starts blowing out the highlights and that sort of thing. So we could play around with this a lot more and get it looking a little bit better. But that gives you an idea of how Luminar is laid out and how it's a little bit more unique than something like Lightroom. So a lot of the same things, but also some extra, those bonus creative sliders, which is cool. And with that, let's take a look at layers. So this is something, you know, it's always been in Photoshop, but it was never in Lightroom and that sort of thing. And it's one of the things that I think makes Photoshop so powerful, is you're able to add different layers, you're able to add masks, and you're able to add blending between the layers, which is really cool. So what I've done here is I've got my base edit here, and just to make things easy, I'm just going to go here and rename it. So this is where I've done all my base editing. So that's what we just did. Now I've gone and created this layer on top of it. So it's like taking a sheet of paper, you know, that's my base edit with the picture and everything, and then adding a clear sheet on top of it. So I can add effects to this. So say I wanted to add some structure, and we just wanted to apply it to the hills in the back. Well, just looking at the hills, ignoring everything else in the picture, that looks pretty cool. So I've added some structure. Right now, it's applying over the entire edit. So we've got the base piece of paper underneath. We've applied this clear sheet over top, and now we're just going to kind of cut away parts of that clear sheet or block them out so that only some of it shows through, and the rest shows the bottom base edit through the bottom kind of thing. So it's only showing parts of it. So what we would do there is if I hit this brush, you'll see it pops up with my brush on the screen, and as soon as I start editing, or as soon as I start drawing in, it's letting me paste the edits that I made on that layer. It's letting me kind of brush those into into the photo. And you can see it kind of taking shape and taking effect. And then up here I've got, as soon as I start brushing, it's popped up with my brush options. So I can change the opacity of it. So I can slide that up to 100%, the softness of the brush, and you can see how that's changing the brush itself, and then the size of the brush. And you can also, just like Lightroom, you can use the square brackets to make it bigger and smaller on the keyboard, which is sometimes easier. And then you can change the brush here. So if I want to brush white and reveal what's underneath, conceal what's underneath, I guess, and let what I've just, the edits that I've just made show through, it's the white brush. And then if I wanted to hide anything, it's that black one. So you can see, so by changing the brush, I'm actually erasing that. And the whole time, it's created this mask up here. So what is white is showing what I've edited on this layer, and what is black is hiding it. So so going back to the white one, I can brush that little area back in. So it's really cool. So you can see if I turn this off with this little eyeball here, turn it off, it hides that, and then turn it on, it shows it again. So it just gives you a really layer by layer editing ability. So you can make effects and turn them on and off, and then you can start doing things like this one where you blend them differently with the layers underneath. You can change the opacity of this layer. So just by sliding it up or down, you can change. Maybe you don't want it that strong of an effect and you just want it a little bit lower, something like that. So it's quite cool what you can do. And so then you could go in, if you wanted, you could rename this one sharpening or structure in mountains, something like that. But that just gives you a really quick idea of what you can do with layers. And you can just add unlimited amounts of layers, and there's tons and tons of options. So then we could add another one on top. You can add an image layer, so that's a totally different photo, and then you could brush in maybe a different sky or something like that. If you want to replace this sky with something out of a different photo, you could do that. And then creating a new stamped layer basically takes all the changes that you've made in all of the layers underneath, and then puts one layer on top with all of those changes kind of blended into it. So something like this, and it would merge all of these layers underneath and spit out one layer, so that they're all kind of put together into one layer that you can manipulate from there. So lots of stuff that you can do with the layers, and it gives you pretty much endless ability to work around and get creative and that sort of thing. The other thing that you can do here, so I'll just show you another quick thing that I like to do, and it's called luminosity masking, and you might have heard of this. Basically what it's going to do is I'm going to take this layer and I'm going to say, let's go to Workspace. So you can either add in these filters individually, or you can go back to your Workspace, and let's see what the Quick and Awesome does. And I'm going to do a luminosity mask. So I'm just going to make a few changes, doesn't really matter what they are. And then what a luminosity mask does is it basically picks out, let me get it started actually, and then while it's loading up, we can talk about it quick. So right clicking on here, so right clicking on the layer that I want to do, mask, create luminosity mask, and it's going to take a bit of time and create that. What it basically does is it picks out all of the highlights, so maybe these places down here in the water, the sky, some parts of the lake, picks out all of those and completely isolates them. So it masks out all of the dark stuff, so you can make changes just to the bright stuff and not affect anything in the dark, or you can invert that mask, which I'll show you how to do that really quick, and then you could affect just the dark stuff. So it gives you this huge amount of control over isolating the lights or isolating the darks. And so it's really cool. So you can see here, here's my layer. Those are the effects that I've made, and you can see everything that's black is the dark stuff. So it's masked that out. Everything that's white is the light stuff, but it's also applied kind of a gray stuff in the middle areas. So it's partly affects those, but not as much as the pure whites. So it's really, really cool what it does. So it's not just separating whites and blacks, it's separating whites and blacks and putting everything in the middle, kind of in that halfway in between. So it's really, really cool what it does. And then, so all these changes that I've made, so say I wanted to boost the vibrance of the highlights and the saturation of the highlights, we'll just do something obvious. You can see what it does there. Not really a good example of what you would use it for, but it kind of gives you an idea of how it picks out just the, you know, those highlights and separates them into two different packages. And then if you wanted to switch this around, you just go invert mask, and then it's got all of the effects applying to the shadows, and then all of the lights and everything in between kind of put to the other side. So that's what luminosity masking is. You used to be able to do it in Photoshop, but it was a few steps, not quite as easy as just clicking a button like we just did. So that's quite impressive. And then just really quickly, another thing I'll mention is, you know, Macphun just released not that long ago a new program called Aurora HDR, and that for me completely revolutionized how I do my HDR photos. I used to use Photomatics, and then I did some in Lightroom, but nothing was really a good solution that I found, and they came out with Aurora HDR, and it totally changed how I do it. So it's a really similar to layout to this. So that's one of the good things that I found, is that Luminar and Aurora HDR are so similar in how they're laid out and how to use them, that if you start using one, it's really easy to jump over and use the other. So I really like that about Luminar. It's very similar to how Aurora HDR is to use. And then the last thing we'll just take a quick look at is just presets. Presets are cool, and I use them a ton in Lightroom. I create my own, or I download presets from the internet. But in Luminar, they're even better. So you can, let's go ahead and make a new layer. Close that one up, and then let's use one of these presets. So you could pick from any of these. I haven't used that many of them, but let's see. This one's kind of cool. So we apply August Rush. And so that's applying to layer 1, which is on top of all the other ones. So it's showing all this stuff from the bottom as well as layer 1 on top. And basically this is what this preset is doing. It's doing these sliders in this amount, and so you can go in and change them and that sort of thing. Or right here, you can just change how much that preset is applied. So anything from 0, and then you can see it slowly kind of builds up all the way up to 100%. And then you could also take this layer here, and you could, you know, crank it down and that sort of thing. So you can, between layers and presets and all the rest, it just gives you so much control and so much creative possibility with Luminar. So it's really cool. And then the other thing that you could do is, if you really like what this preset is doing, but not everything. So maybe you like what it's doing to the hills and the sky. So then you just hop over here, you grab one of your tools, either gradient, filter, whatever you want to do. I'm going to use the brush, and if I just start brushing, it's going to apply that preset, but only to the parts that I brush in. So you can see exactly what it's doing. Make my brush bigger, and just brush in, you know, just the top half of the photo or something like that. So it looks pretty terrible, but you know, it gives you an idea of how much stuff you can do. And then if you wanted to erase part of that, you just change your brush over there. You can also hit X, which switches between the brushes, or you can hold down Option, which basically gives you the other one really quickly. But you could also eliminate sections of it, and then you can look up here at your mask and see what's painted in, which is the white, and then black is what's being hidden, basically. So that's layers, filters, the workspace, basically, you know, how you do everything in Luminar. And then the very last thing that I'll say about Luminar that I really like is how cheap it is. It's $53 is what I paid for it, and that's New Zealand dollars, so it's even less if it's US dollars. But for $53, you get a really, really capable program. and it can do so much. And maybe it's not a complete replacement of Lightroom, because Lightroom has that ability to organize files and that sort of thing that I think Luminar is just missing. But as a really cool tool to play around with and edit photos with, I think Luminar is exceptional value. So that's Luminar. Let's look at a couple of things that I don't like so much about Luminar. One thing, you might have noticed it as we're playing around. Sometimes Luminar seems a little bit slow. So you'll see, you make a change like this. And it takes a little bit while to load it. Let's add another layer. And as you drag these sliders around, it's sometimes a little bit slow and clumsy. And then every now and then it'll pop up with a little thing down here saying image processing, and it kind of slows the whole program down. It just feels a little bit clunky sometimes. Not the end of the world or anything like that. But things like you go here to click transform and it has to prepare it, and it's not just click of a button and it's ready. It doesn't take long. It's not the end of the world. But just, it seems like it's a little bit clunky and clumsy to use, whereas Lightroom is always, seems quite smooth and flows really well between edits and using the tools and that sort of thing. And it always, and Luminar always seems to be loading your image over and over again, whereas Lightroom seems to be a little bit smoother in that process. And then the other thing that I've already mentioned that I don't really like is that it doesn't replace Lightroom's library module. So you're not able to organize and catalog your photos and just pull one up after another and sync different settings in photos and that sort of thing. It's just kind of a one photo at a time. You do have the option to batch process. So you can go here and click batch processing. So you can do more than one at a time, but it's just not quite as clean and smooth as Lightroom is for editing multiple photos at a time and organizing your photos. And once a photo is done, putting it into a folder so you know where you're going to find it. It just doesn't have that ability. And that's something that I think it'll never be able to replace Lightroom because of that. And then the other thing is just the look of the photo when you're editing it. It just looks a little bit grainier, not as nice and sharp as a photo in Lightroom does. And it just seems to lack something there. But then as soon as you go and export the photo, it's got all that detail and everything in there. So you're not losing anything. It's just it just looks not as good when you're here in this editing window. It looks a little bit blockier and that sort of thing. A little bit less clean, I guess, would be the way to say it. And then once it's edited as well, it just has a different look than Lightroom. It's almost like an HDR photo. It has, sometimes oversaturated, and then it's easy to lose control of the photo as well, and make it look completely fake. And it's just, and I don't even mind the look of photos sometimes when they are over edited. It's just, doing something like the Polarising Filter, for example. It's just easy to let that, look kind of garbage, really. Whereas Lightroom seems to always be in a little bit more control. But that's fine. It's just another program. It's fun to play around with and gives you a different look. So it's not make or break or anything. It's just different. And then the one of the other things that's lacking is you can't stitch together photos. So in Lightroom, starting in, I think it was Lightroom 6 that it was released, you're actually able to photo merge your photos into either HDRs or panoramas, which is cool. So you can take 4 or 5 different photos, put them together into one big panorama, all within Lightroom. And that's just something that's not in Luminar. It's lacking, and not the end of the world, but it's just something that's not there that is in Lightroom. So it is to me a downfall. HDR isn't a big deal at all, because I already do that in Macphun's other program called Aurora HDR. So that's not a big deal at all. And then the last thing is just the file format. So when you bring a file over from Lightroom, if I was to save this right now, it would save as Luminar's own file format. See, we've lost that native raw file format out of the camera. So I shoot Sony, so I get ARW files. And as soon as I bring it into Luminar and then take it back into Lightroom or export it, I'm either exporting as a TIFF or a JPEG, in which case I'm cutting out a bunch of information and saving my edits, baking them into the photo, basically, baking it into that file, or I save it as Luminar's file format. And lots of the times those files get absolutely massive with all these layers and that sort of thing. I've had them up to 300 or 400 megabytes before, when the photo itself comes out of the camera as 25. So it's just again, just not as clean and nice to use as Lightroom. Lightroom, you edit a photo and nothing changes to that base file at all. You're just making a little sidecar file that gets applied as a little layer over top of the photo. But yeah, so it's just a little bit messier in my opinion, anyways. But that's the bad stuff. There's really not that much. Overall, I think it's a really cool program. It's a lot of fun to use. There's so much that you can do, so many different sliders and filters and layers and blending the layers and luminosity masking, that I really think that the possibilities are endless, and it just lets you give your photos a different look. So to me, Luminar is an awesome program at $50 or $70 or whatever it ends up costing you. I think it's totally awesome, and especially if you're just starting out in photo editing and you don't really want to get onto Adobe's subscription base for their Creative Cloud, I think jumping onto something like Luminar is really cool. All you're missing out on is that cataloging effect in Lightroom, but you could always do something like that in in your hard drive or whatever. You could set up a file system there so you can find your photos. So it's not the end of the world. You could get on without Lightroom. For me, it's a little bit too far. I'm a little bit too dependent on it already. But Luminar is an awesome program, and it gives you all of everything and more that you can do in the develop module of Lightroom. So I would totally recommend the program. For me, it's just not enough to replace what I'm already doing, but it will definitely be something that I, from time to time, chuck a photo in here, edit it up, and get a different look than I probably could with any other photo. So that's Luminar. That's my quick thoughts on it. Now, if you want to find out a little bit more and get the full review and some other ideas that I've got, head over to either my blog at Find a Way Photography, or I'll put a link down in the description part of this video that'll take you over there. But there's a few more bits of information and a little bit a little bit clearer layout and that sort of thing if you want to read through my thoughts there. So check that out as well. But in the meantime, head over to Macphun's website and download even a free copy of Luminar and try it out for yourself. And then if you want to buy it, it's really not that expensive. So I think it's totally worth it. So thanks for joining me today, guys, and see you on the next one. Thanks.